When I was doing the research for my book, Satisfy Her Sexually, written under the pen name Jack Jones, I came across a startling statistic about women that you might have a hard time believing, as I did. Uh, it turns out that when they did a survey, over 54% of women confessed to having a rape fantasy. Now, this struck me as surprising, and it made me wonder if 54% of women confess to having a rape fantasy, how many women have the fantasy and don't confess about it? So it made me curious, like, what is it about that that is appealing? And I think I understand that, um, or at least this is one way of seeing it, is that there's a certain excitement and danger, and that part of it is very exciting. Um, and I think the fantasy is appealing because you can have that excitement without the humiliation or the harm of the actual event. So it got me thinking about women who've faced sexual trauma and women that I've dated who've had that experience, and something that a certain kind of man can do to free her from that. And here's how it works. Um, Usually, you find out what happened to the girl, and I say this is best for girls that are like young, 18 to 29, 30, because these are the times when a girl is figuring out those types of um, emotional traumas. And this is especially good for a man who's older because there's a certain level of authority, a certain level of dominance, a certain level of safety that comes from an older man. And here's what you do: is you find out what the sexual trauma was, whether it was a rape or whatever it was. And you find out all the details. And then when you are making love to her, you become, you replay the rapist role. So here's how you do it. I dated this one girl who, when she was younger, a guy had met her at the beach, taken her back to his place, and took advantage of her. And that was a um, big problem. Made her very afraid. And so when we were together, I replayed that scene, and I became the person who was taking advantage of her. And here's what happens. Here's an interesting thing. Because she feels safe with me and loved by me and protected by me, something happens in her mind when we replay that fantasy or that event. It turns into more of a fantasy. Now, I've had this experience with different women that I've dated, and it's always has great effects. Where now it takes a certain kind of woman, right? If a woman is very prudish or she's very, you know, um, stuck up, or like, there she has to have a certain level of understanding of her own rascality. She has to understand her own sensual nature to some degree. She has to accept that. But if she does, then the confusion and the harm of that event can be, you can liberate her from it. And see, here's what I think that's what men and women are for, is to help each other be liberated from the the chains that we put around ourselves. And so this is the way that an older man, especially, can help a younger woman who has endured some sort of sexual trauma by bringing her pleasure to the place that caused such pain.